Greetings, everybody, and welcome to the session. So, we are really happy and to have amongst us eminent speakers. And I'd like to welcome you all to the session that has been organized on East Turkestan Calling, the ongoing legal struggle, and has been organized by Team Red Lantern. And Red Lantern Analytica is an international affairs observer group that is based out of New Delhi, India. It focuses on critical issues that are related to China, with special focus on Sino India relations, issues of national security, international security, energy, and environment. The main aim of our organization is to draw in India's foremost academic institutions and security intelligentsia, corporate institutions, monetary establishments, and experts in discussions on India's foreign policy and extend the country's role in global issues. To maximize the institutional and scholarly capacity of strategic thinking in India, we are required to integrate expertise in our research in order to foster an even minded international strategy for India. This is a young organization that is in constant search for fresh ideas and thoughts in the strategic studies discourse. With this goal in mind, we have set ourselves up as an autonomous and a solitary international strategic think tank. We are an intellectual startup functioning with a small number of individuals who are passionate about international affairs. I would also like to welcome today's moderator, Madiha, who is a research scholar in development studies from Tata Institute of Social Sciences. This session will be moderated by Madiha, and I'd like to welcome all of you once again. And now I'll request Madiha to take over the further session.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Ifra. Greetings, everybody. I hope all of you are in good health and coping spirits. I am Madiha. Today on the topic East Turkestan Calling, the ongoing Uyghur struggle, we have with us our first distinguished speaker, Mr. Saleh Hudayar. Mr. Hudayar is a leading voice advocating the restoration of the East Turkestan's independence. I would like to extend heartiest welcome and invite Mr. Saleh to share his insights with us.
Thank you. Firstly, hello and good evening to everyone in India and those who are listening. Before I start, I want to thank Red Lantern Analytica for organizing and hosting today's important webinar on the ongoing struggle of East Turkestan and its people. As many of you may already be aware, the People's Republic of China has been waging an ongoing brutal campaign of colonization and occupation of East Turkestan since December 22nd, 1949. Starting in May of 2014, the Chinese government began a systematic campaign of mass internment and genocide against Uyghurs, Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, and other Turkic peoples in East Turkestan, and sadly, this is continuing as we speak. Unfortunately, there are many misconceptions about East Turkestan and its people, the Sino-East Turkestan conflict, the ongoing genocide, and the nature of the East Turkestan national independence movement due to Chinese government propaganda and overall lack of awareness. Since 1954, the Chinese government under the Chinese Communist Party has been falsely claiming East Turkestan as, quote, a part of China since ancient times, end quote, without any historical basis. Located in the center of Asia, East Turkestan is a vast country that stretches over 1,828,418 square kilometers. It is roughly the same size as the country of North Sudan, or 3 times the size of the country of France. East Turkestan is a landlocked country and borders 10 countries, including Russia to the north, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan to the west, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India to the south, and Tibet, China, and Mongolia to the east. East Turkestan is extremely rich in natural and mineral resources such as oil, natural gas, uranium, gold, silver, copper, tungsten, beryllium, jade, and many other resources. Archaeological evidence shows that East Turkestan has been the homeland of Uyghur and other Indo-European and Turkic peoples for over 6,000 years. Genetic research shows that the modern Uyghur people of East Turkestan are the direct hybrid descendants of the ancient Indo-European and Turkic peoples inhabiting East Turkestan and Greater Central Asia. With a long history as an independent country and having limited contact with what is now known today as China or the Chinese people, East Turkestan has been the cradle of Indo-European and Turkic civilization, giving birth to numerous independent kingdoms, states, and even empires. In the ancient past, much like today, East Turkestan served as the crossroads of trade as a major economic hub, facilitating cultural and economic exchanges between Central Asia, South Asia, East Asia, the Middle East, and even as far as Europe. Due to its strategic location and mineral and natural resources, East Turkestan is presently the cornerstone of China's trillion-dollar Belt and Road Initiative. Starting in the early 18th century, East Turkestan faced numerous invasions from the east, leading to the fall of the Turkic Yarkent Khanate, which ruled over much of East Turkestan in 1705, and a brief period of rule under the Mongol Jungar Khanate from 1705 to 1759. In 1759, the Manchu Qing dynasty invaded East Turkestan and waged genocide against over 600,000 Yungars in what historians describe as the first modern genocide. Following the Jungar genocide, the Manchu Qing dynasty, like the British East India Company, occupied East Turkestan as a colony between 1759 and 1863. During this period, the people of East Turkestan engaged in 42 large-scale uprisings against the Manchu Qing occupation. In 1865, the people of East Turkestan, under the leadership of Pyaf Beg, rose against Qing occupation and declared their independence. Unfortunately, due to the great game, the great power competition between the British Empire and the Russian Empire, East Turkestan, which had been serving as a buffer between these two empires, was once again invaded by the Manchu Qing dynasty in 1876 with the financial backing of the Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation. On November 18, 1884, for the first time, the Manchu Qing Empire officially incorporated East Turkestan into the Qing Empire as Xinjiang, meaning the colony or the new territory in the Chinese language. Between 1884 and 1912, several large-scale failed uprisings against the Manchu Qing occupation occurred across East Turkestan. With the fall of the Manchu Qing dynasty in the 1912 Chinese Revolution, East Turkestan was ruled by semi-autonomous Turkic warlords and Chinese officials from the Qing era. During this period, the people of East Turkestan once again engaged in several failed uprisings to restore their lost independence. The rise of global anti-colonialism and nationalism in the early 20th century led to a renewed East Turkestan national liberation movement. In 1921, the term Uyghur was revived to define the non-nomadic Turkic peoples of East Turkestan who had previously been referred to as Turkeys or Eastern Turkeys. In 1931, the people of Kumul in far eastern East Turkestan rose against Chinese warlords, leading to a national liberation movement that would ultimately result in the establishment of the first East Turkestan Republic on November 12, 1933. Unfortunately, due to lack of international support and Soviet intervention, the first East Turkestan Republic was overthrown on April 16, 1934. However, the people of East Turkestan continued to resist Chinese occupation. In 1937, General Mahmud Moiti, the former defense minister of the East Turkestan Republic, fled to India where he strived to obtain support for East Turkestan's struggle to regain its independence. His deputies in East Turkestan rebelled against Chinese occupation and briefly declared an independent government in southern East Turkestan in May 1937 before it too was crushed by Soviet intervention in October of 1937. In 1944, Uyghurs, Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, Uzbeks, Tatars, and even Mongols joined together to resist Chinese occupation and declared independence for the second time as the East Turkestan Republic on November 12, 1944. Although Soviet officials initially supported the Second East Turkestan Republic, East Turkestan again became a victim of great power politics. During this period, the Republic of China under the Kuomintang, or the Chinese nationalists, used Uyghurs like Asa Yusuf Alptekin, Masood Sabri, and others to oppose the East Turkestan Republic and instead worked to persuade the East Turkestani people to seek autonomy under China. Despite these efforts by China, the people of East Turkestan remained steadfast to maintain their independence. However, in August 1949, the senior political and military leaders of the East Turkestan Republic were assassinated in what was described as a tragic plane crash. 12 days after establishing the so-called People's Republic of China, the Chinese Communist Party's People's Liberation Army invaded East Turkestan on October 13, 1949. Once again, due to a lack of international support and Soviet intervention combined with Chinese invasion, the independent East Turkestan Republic was overthrown on December 22, 1949. The people of East Turkestan tried to resist as best as they could, and in the first 5 years of Chinese communist occupation, over 150,000 East Turkestanis were killed. Over the decades, the Uyghur and other Turkic peoples of East Turkestan continued to resist Chinese occupation and colonization. During the 1960s until the 1980s, the East Turkestan People's Revolutionary Party was the largest armed organization to struggle for restoring East Turkestan's independence. However, it too was crushed by the late 1980s due to extensive Chinese intelligence operations. The last major armed uprising against Chinese occupation occurred on April 5, 1990, in what became known as the Baron Massacre. With the fall of the Soviet Union and the independence of the Central Asian republics, the people of East Turkestan were once more inspired to continue their struggle to regain their independence. In December 1992, leaders of the East Turkestani communities in Central Asia and the Middle East convened in Istanbul to establish the East Turkestan National Congress, once again declaring that restoring East Turkestan's independence was the fundamental goal of the people of East Turkestan. However, in March 1996, the Chinese Communist Party convened a high-level secret meeting in Beijing and issued several directives to ensure its occupation of East Turkestan. One of these directives, mentioned in the secret leaked document number 7 of 1996, sought to prevent the East Turkestan problem from becoming internationalized by, quote, dividing the East Turkestani organizations, winning over most of them, and alienating those striving for independence and fighting against them, end quote. In April 2001, a Chinese government internal document stated, quote, that the separatist question of East Turkestan must be settled in 2 years, end quote. Following the September 11 terrorist attacks and the launch of the global war on terror, China's government announced that China was a victim of terrorism, despite the fact that 2 weeks prior to the September 11 terrorist attacks, the Chinese Communist Party secretary in East Turkestan, Wang Luqian, had stated that East Turkestan was peaceful and there were no acts of violence or unrest. 2 months later, on November 11, 2001, the Chinese government stood before the UN and sought to portray the broad East Turkestan national independence movement as a terrorist or Islamist movement by fabricating the so-called East Turkestan Islamic movement, which had never been previously mentioned. In line with these tragic developments, almost overnight, infighting broke out within the diaspora East Turkestani communities and organizations, dividing the once ideologically united East Turkestani diaspora community into two main factions. On one side, Uyghurs under the leadership of Erkin Alptekin, the son of the late KMT-aligned Asa Yusuf Alptekin, dissolved the East Turkestan National Congress and established the World Uyghur Congress in Munich in April 2004 to advocate for only human rights and greater autonomy for the Uyghur people under China. Conservative Uyghurs and Kazakhs who vowed to remain committed to the East Turkestani people's goal to regain their independence, in turn, convened in Washington, D.C. and declared the formal establishment of the East Turkestan government in exile in September 14, 2004. Over the past 2 decades, the Chinese government has been using the excuse of counterterrorism and anti-separatism to justify its ongoing campaign of colonization, genocide, and occupation. while at the same time it has been working aggressively to divide, conquer, and squash our nation's efforts to regain its independence. Having achieved a level of economic, political, and military power to the point that China thinks that it can go unchallenged, Xi Jinping launched the Chinese dream and the goal of obtaining or achieving national rejuvenation. China's mission to achieve so-called national rejuvenation and global supremacy is nothing new. It was initially laid out by the Chinese leader Sun Yat-sen in 1922 and was formally launched in 2014 by Xi Jinping. Since 2014, the Chinese government has locked up millions of Uyghurs, Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, and other Turkic peoples into concentration camps, prisons, and slave labor camps. According to the US Department of Defense estimate from May 2019, the number of people detained is over 3 million. A Chinese white paper from September 2020 states that 1,290,000 Uyghur and other Turkic peoples had been sent to, quote, vocational training and re-education camps, end quote, a sick euphemism for concentration camps, per year between 2014 and 2019, suggesting that over the course of 6 years, some 7.8 million Uyghur and other Turkic peoples may have been sent to the concentration camps. East Turkestan's unique culture, language, identity, and history are being completely eroded. As we speak, East Turkestani people continue to be subjected to genocide and other crimes against humanity, including but not limited to forced assimilation, forced sterilization, gang rape, organ harvesting, and even execution. Over 850,000 Uyghur and other Turkic children have been forcibly separated from their families and sent to Chinese boarding schools and orphanages to be raised as, quote, loyal Chinese citizens, end quote. While tens of thousands of Uyghur and other Turkic women are being forcibly married to Chinese men. The Chinese Communist Party and the government of the People's Republic of China seeks to achieve complete national rejuvenation, a sick fascistic euphemism for creating a homogeneous Chinese identity by either forcibly assimilating or eradicating all the non-Chinese peoples in the occupied countries of East Turkestan, Tibet, Southern Mongolia, and Manchuria by 2035. Now more than ever, it is imperative that all East Turkestanis put aside their differences and revert to our people's fundamental goal of restoring East Turkestan's independence. For if we fail to regain our independence in the next decade or so, our culture, identity, language, and our very existence will be forever lost. East Turkestan's ongoing colonization, genocide, and occupation is not a recent occurrence. East Turkestan is not a so-called part of China. Instead, it is an occupied country. The people of East Turkestan are not so-called separatists, as they are a different nation with a unique culture, language, and identity with a long history of independence, having declared independence as the East Turkestan Republic long before the creation of the so-called People's Republic of China. Nor is the East Turkestani cause solely about obtaining fundamental human rights and democracy. It is an anti-colonial national liberation struggle carried out by a nation with an ancient history seeking to preserve its very existence by restoring its rightful independence. History has repeatedly shown nations who fail to protect and maintain their independence cannot ensure their basic human rights and freedoms. Lastly, I'd like to comment on the Chinese Foreign Minister's visit to India yesterday and the statements made by His Excellency External Affairs Minister Jaishankar regarding China-India ties. India's External Affairs Minister stated, quote, "Is our situation normal? No, it is not normal, and it cannot be till pending issues at the border areas are resolved," end quote. We want to remind our fellow neighbors in India that India does not share a border with China. Instead, it shares a border with Chinese-occupied East Turkestan and Tibet. India will never be able to have peace at its northern borders so long as China continues its occupation of East Turkestan and Tibet. Thus, in closing, we call on India to support their East Turkestani and Tibetan neighbors struggle to regain their lost freedom and independence. For with the increasing growing threat of China to the sovereignty and security of all nations in the Indo-Pacific, India's future security and sovereignty may be dependent on the security and sovereignty of East Turkestan and Tibet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for your insightful and thought-provoking comments. Your astute reflections about the history and movement of the East Turkestan movement, the importance of international solidarity and support, has made us ponder about the concerns of the oppression faced by the Uyghurs and the silencing of the experiences and of being as Uyghurs. The conversation also brings forth the importance of lived experience narratives as solidarity memoirs to not forget. The silence around the issues of violation of beings, oppression, and a genocidal erasure flouts the rights of community to exist and principles of as principles of dignified life, justice, and equality. As we reflect upon the crucial aspects of the Uyghur struggle, I would like to invite our second distinguished speaker, Mr. Mamitin Ala. Dr. Ala is the strategic advisor and the EU representative of East Turkestan government. He's also an advocate for the Uyghur human rights movement. Dr. Ala.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the introduction, and good evening, my dear friends and listeners and others. At this, I would like to, and also thank you for Salih for his very detailed descriptions of our history and current situation and the future aspirations, political and cultural, religious and otherwise. So my topic will be focused on the psychological warfare of China against Uyghurs. So before we are moving on, I would like to define the term psychological warfare. We have heard lots of warfares or wars, type like military wars, economic wars, information wars, cyber wars, etc. But psychological warfare is nothing new. It's as old as the human beings or the human society. But this the psychological warfare has been intensively, systematically, and the in an evil way used by the Chinese government against Uyghurs in general in East Turkestan and beyond. And I would like to give you some basic mechanisms of this warfare instead of going deep into its very complex and very inhuman aspects because of the time constraint. So psychological warfare, by definition, is a very actions to change the morale of actions or behavior of the opponents. But this is a quite neutral definition. But this warfare is used by very authoritarian like China. Then this warfare gets very nasty, very dangerous, and very inhuman. So let us take some steps back to look at how this psychological warfare of China came from. Let me say, China learned the psychological warfare from its brother, big brother, the former Soviet Union. Stalin was a monster in using psychological warfare in subduing opponents or so-called opponents in the Great Purge in the history of the former Soviet Union during the 30s and 40s, in particular 30s. As we all know that Stalin was mercilessly purged the former Soviet Union of some alleged enemies of state by putting them in a very tightly controlled environment with military rules to force them to confess their crimes. And most of the political prisoners at that time were were forced to confess their crimes that they didn't commit. And hence, first of all, the methods of this process was to put pressure on them to confess their crimes and to intimidate them, to crush their resistance, to force them to very inhuman condition through torture, humiliation, and others, to ultimately confess that they are nothing and party is everything. This is the basic function or mechanism of the psychological warfare that former communists were using and quite successfully. And secondly, as we know that Nazis also used psychological warfare against a Jewish in Germany and beyond during the Second World War. More than 6 million Jewish people and others in so-called extermination camps. So inside these camps, the Nazis also used some psychological warfare to intimidate the Jewish inmates there by killing them, by putting them in gas chambers and extra. So it has created extremely inhuman treatment of Jewish inmates there. It was one of the dark stain on the conscience of humanity during the Second World War. And as we all know that in 1950s, some US soldiers became by the Chinese. More than 2,000, even more than 2,000 US soldiers went through this the psychological warfare, or what we call is brainwashing process. That ultimately the thought process was changed to a level where they changed their perceptions of the US, seeing it as an enemy of humanity. Some of them went through this complete thought change process. It shocked the US intelligence community and psychologists and others. And so, which means that China knew and used it successfully. China knew how to use the brainwashing techniques or methods to change the minds and behavior of inmates in a tightly controlled environment. And now, 1950s, when China started to purge its party, the Mao Zedong also used some aspects of this brainwashing and manipulation techniques, and quite successfully. And during the Cultural Revolution, China put lots of China's intellectuals and others in camps. It's more or less like the same camps that Uyghurs are in now. But at that time, in that camps, these Chinese intellectuals were forced to confess their crimes against the Chinese Communist Party in exactly the same way that the Soviet intellectuals were forced to confess. This structure is almost the same, but methods went harder, harsher, and nastier and more evil by Mao Zedong regime. And when it comes to Uyghurs, conditions of these camps far more horrific than all previous camps, educational or whatever. As Salih said, the education or re-education is just a name, a sham. But in reality, they are torture chambers. And now, let me just focus on how the Chinese communists now still using the psychological warfare against Uyghurs. Let me again invite you to focus on 9/11 tragic incidents in the US. After that incident, we had the war on terror. After that, China seized that opportunity to label all Uyghur resistance as terrorism against Chinese sovereignty. And any kind of Uyghur resistance against Chinese occupation in East Turkestan has been labeled by the Chinese government as a terroristic action. So this of the re-education of so-called re-education camps used this anti-terrorism rhetoric to justify its own psychological warfare against Uyghurs. First of all, they say that Islam is a virus. We all know that Marx says that all religions are opium. Chinese communists say that Islam is a virus. If we follow this argument deductively, the second argument is that all Muslims or all Uyghur Muslims are infected by this virus. Their mind is infected and needing quarantine. They must be separated from the rest of the society because they are dangerous. Hence, first step is the Chinese government created networks of the camps across East Turkestan, numbering somehow beyond 1,000 operative at this stage. So these are considered as kind of like quarantine or psychological or political quarantine centers where Uyghurs have en masse incarcerated to get them rid of Islamic or terroristic viruses. This is the backbone of the Chinese propaganda to justify its our massive, inhuman, and evil scheme of the so-called re-education centers, which are by nature extermination camps. And now I would like to read, and now you would ask me, what are the conditions camps? I would like to read one of the statements of a lady as a camp survivor. She lives now in France, and she said in a quite horrific way that she described this in this way. Camps, I quote, "We were ordered to deny who we were, feed on traditions, our beliefs, our language, to insult people. Women like me who emerged from the camps are no longer who we once were. We are shadows, are dead." Her name is Gulbahar Haitwaji. So these are the chilling of a lady, a survivor from this horrific camps. Inside the camps, as Salih briefly touched upon, inside camps, Uyghurs were forced to denounce their religion, not to speak their own language. And now I will give you quite like a example of what she said again. She said that there are, I quote, toilet papers, no toilet, no shower. Imagine that in such a condition, if there's no toilet papers, what happens? A animal, it's like it's dehumanization. It's humiliation and dehumanization. The purpose of this is to destroy the last drop of being human and dignity, to destroy human psyche, to destroy human integrity, human dignity, ultimately to reduce human being to something less than human. How these methods are widely inside the camps systematically in such a tightly controlled environment with military rules, and nobody is able to escape from such an environment. This is one way. This is like a one-way road. See, you can enter such a world. There's no come out of such a horrific hell. This is a hell on earth. This is a hell on earth that nobody is alive in the end. And apart from that, we heard from lots of like statements of the survivors that inside the camps there are systematic rapes. Also there are, but also like organ harvesting. It's also has also been a lucrative business for Chinese government. And interestingly, and horribly interestingly, that some camps are adjacent to some airports, and inside some airport there's some secret way to get to the airplane quickly to carry or deliver the organs forcibly removed from the Uyghur inmates to the hospitals inside China. So effective, but inhumanly effective business for the Chinese government. And also, still was that there are also some kind of organs called halal organs for the Muslims from the Muslim countries. All these organs are almost taken Uyghurs. Exactly how many Uyghurs have lost their organs? But we know that this is a quite systematic operation. Imagine that inside such a camps, soul will be able to survive. Look at some Uyghurs who have been released from the camps, very few Uyghurs. If you look at some photos of these Uyghurs from some Chinese channels or some social media, they can't walk. If you look deep into their eyes are dead empty. The malnutrition, inhuman treatment, torture, and others. So that's how the Chinese government has made turn Uyghurs into living corpses. Souls are destroyed. And that's why we saw that Haitwaji said that our souls are dead. I would like to touch briefly upon what's happening to Uyghurs outside of the camps. I would like to focus on Uyghur children. That children are the most vulnerable victims of war, genocide, natural disaster, and human disasters. We all know the why, because children are unable to defend themselves against condition. So are Uyghur children as well. The Uyghur children, almost a million Uyghur children have been separated from their parents who have been incarcerated in camps. Like research on this. And these children have either been incarcerated in camp type of the facilities where they go through a brainwashing process, announce their identity as Uyghur. They are forced to learn Chinese language. They are forced to denounce their religion. They are forced to deny who they are ultimately. It's sense of like loss of identity. Their psychological well-being is destroyed. It's the unforgettable psychological trauma. Not only collective trauma that Uyghurs are going through inside East Turkestan, but it has already turned it into being a transgenerational trauma that the Uyghur children are carrying with themselves. Secondly, other Uyghurs. There are some Uyghurs who live outside of the camps, but their life than those Uyghurs inside camps, because they are forced to live under the massive surveillance system. It's using face recognition system, DNA profiling, voice recognition system, and even, this is quite recent one, is emotion reading app or system, surveil the movements of Uyghurs. So Uyghurs has nowhere to escape. And all Uyghurs, forget about the Uyghurs inside camps, focus on Uyghurs outside of the camps, are nothing but dot points on this the under the cameras of the surveilled. Knows what they are doing. 7. Everything is monitored, closely monitored. So the Uyghurs are, it's quite safe to say that Uyghurs are living in an open, no better than the camps. Now, the final point I would like to focus on are those Uyghurs in exile, like Saleh and me and others. We are, to some extent, alive, but psychologically, we don't know that we are alive. Our fight against these injustices, the massive injustice that humanity has ever seen, is making us alive. Otherwise, we are psychologically deeply damaged by this ongoing genocide. This genocide is ongoing. We have to face, we have to be exposed to bad news, horrific photos or videos almost on a daily basis over the past 6 years. Past 6 years, day in and day out, night in, night out, is a nightmare for us in general. And all communication channels between us and our loved ones in East Texas are cut off. There's no communication. We are suffering from anxiety over what's happening to our dead ones. We don't know. Even at least I myself, have no idea of whether or not my parents are alive. I have no idea. And so in our mind, in our anxiety infested mind, everything is for us is so whether or not we are able to go to see our parents. And we also know that all our mosques, our previous schools, and everything which created our childhood memories are destroyed. Emotionally, we have nowhere to go back. So we are nowhere we can't go back to our past, emotionally speaking. We can't live in our present, which is too painful. And we can look up to our future, which is too far from, too vague and too bleak. But that is not only me, but that generalizes, that these feelings can be generalizable to other Uyghurs in exile. So at the same time, international community is turning a blind eye to China's genocide against Uyghurs. And not only the Western countries, but also Muslim countries are, to some extent, not quite strong to condemn China's genocidal activities. In particular, Muslim countries recently invited the Chinese Foreign Ministry to the International Islamic this recent Islamic conference. They invited the Chinese foreign minister to attend that conference in Pakistan. That the Uyghur genocide didn't exist, and Uyghurs' lives, and this is what the Islamic countries are tacitly supportive of the Chinese genocide. And psychologically, this destroy the Uyghur Muslims. Proverb saying that we forget deeds of our enemies because that's what they should do. But we can't forget the betrayal of our friends, our religious brothers and sisters, because it's their duty, religious duty, to take care of other Muslims in need and in suffering. But actually, the Muslim countries, none of the Muslim countries has ever said anything to condemn. That's also adds up to our wounds. It's like a salt. It's our wounds that none of the Muslim countries have ever said anything to us, have ever given any kind of help. And the Uyghurs, Rohingyas, and Syrians, and others, if we add all these current tragedies, we can see that the Muslim world is in crisis. There's nothing proud of being Muslim. I am ashamed of being a Muslim. Ashamed of being a Muslim now. Only Muslims have these tragedies. World, forget about the rest of the world. Muslim world is doing nothing. We are the latest victims. Before us, we had Yemenis, we had Iraqis, we had Syrians, and recently we had Rohingyas, and now we Uyghurs are now. Muslim world is still able to sleep, while the most of the Muslims, or very important part of Muslim communities, are suffering almost on a daily basis. And these issues are sidelined. These issues neglected, as if these issues don't exist. And this is a crisis. This is a shame of the Muslims, and shame on the Muslim world.
Thank you, Dr. Ala, for your insights about the questions of solidarity and making us walk through the heart-wrenching journey of what a camp is like for a Uyghur, and how timeless is the intensity of oppression, which functions at multiple levels, be it psychological, physical, economic, or cultural. We ponder and stand in solidarity with you and acknowledge your pain and the oppression faced by the Uyghurs. And we respect your amplification as a diaspora in raising the plight of oppressions faced by the community. Now I open the floor to question and answers and comment section. Please post your questions in the chat box if anyone has any question or any comment. Yeah, I don't see any question as of now. So, Mr. Saleh, I wanted to ask you regarding the silence of the OIC members and the presence of China in the recent meeting, which which Dr. Ala also spoke about. The meeting witnessed a reflection of silence and exclusion and avoiding of talking about the Uyghur Muslims in China. Why is this stark silence on the abuse of Uyghurs in China? And Samrat also has a similar question to mine. And he's also asking, why doesn't OIC take a solid stand against China?
Thank you for the question. There are various reasons as why this is happening. As Dr. Ala mentioned, this is one, the lack of willingness or solidarity amongst the Muslim world as a whole. But more so, I would have to say it's because of geopolitics and economics. The Muslim world is, they're receiving a lot of investment. They have, very close economic ties with China. In fact, the Belt and Road Initiative that I mentioned earlier in my speech, the $1 trillion Belt and Road Initiative, many of the investment projects are through these Muslim countries, whether it's the CPEC or the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor in Pakistan, or whether it's various infrastructure projects in the Middle East. And another thing is that the Chinese communists, during the time of Mao, they played a very smart game in their essence, that while the world, in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, China openly supported, the Palestinians, giving them training, even weapons, and helping them, diplomatically as well. And so from that, there's the majority of the Arab-speaking world. They have this euphoria, this feeling of gratitude to China, and because of that, they are remaining silent on the genocide of Uyghurs and the Turkic peoples. Whereas if you look in Central Asia, for example, many of them are, Turkic-speaking peoples. Many of the, like countries like Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, many of the people inside East Turkestan who are also in these camps are, in addition to Uyghurs, are Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, Uzbeks, and others. They are silent because they are, caught between two giants. They have the Russian Empire, still in its essence, or the remnants of the Russian Empire, and then to the east they have the Chinese. There is no viable alternative for the time being, and this is something that the Modi administration in India has recently been working to, address by holding the first ever India Central Asia Summit. And this is something that the West is also trying to, do in Central Asia, is to build ties, is because of their fear and their economic reliance on China that they are not able to speak out.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Saleh, for your comments. There is another question in the chat who, like from Rebel Duck, he asks about how can the intelligentsia and the human rights organization like on the Uyghur plight, let the Uyghur voices be heard and amplified. So if Dr. Ala could give his comments.
Let us say, like the support of the Ukrainian resistance and fight against Russian occupation is a good example. The whole world is mobilized to lend their support to Ukrainians. They are fighting against, they're fighting their life and death struggle against the Russian occupation. This is the great example. And of course, we can see that great difference, disparity between the levels of support that Ukrainians have received and also others have already received it. So I am not envious of the support that Ukrainians receive, but that is the will of humanity against injustices, occupation, and violence. I am quite happy that humanity exists. That's a great thing. What we can do, as we can just learn from this support of Ukrainians, that the all levels of the world, from the business world to the intelligentsia, from the intelligentsia to ordinary people, even in symbolic way, just put the Uyghur flag on the restaurant or somewhere. They hold the demonstrations against the Chinese occupation as well as Chinese treatment of Uyghurs, etc. This all can be done. We may not be able to do it in a massive scale, that as we are doing for Ukraine at this stage, but we can do it constantly for Uyghurs at smaller scale, but in a very strong way that will give us a sense of solidarity, give us a sense of support, and ultimately it gives us a sense of hope that we are desperate to hold on to. This is I guess this is quite important. And also I would like to say, it's, for example, I expect the support from Muslim brothers and sisters, but at the same time, before this, we also have a kind of sense of humanity. The Ukrainians receiving support from all walks of life, being Muslim, non-Muslim, all of them are, not all of them, but most of them are supporting Ukrainian side. And Uyghurs are the same. So Uyghurs as human beings need the support from all walks of life across the world. Not necessarily you being a Muslim, you being a Hindu, you being a Buddhist or whatever. But this is the serious the violations of not only human rights but human lives on a daily basis. And secondly, if China's action is not held accountable, then the others will become victims. And we also saw quite closely that China had supported the Burmese government to suppress Rohingyas, for example. China has had this capacity to help other authoritarian regimes to kill the innocent people. And China will do the same. The DNA of the CCP is to control, is to use violence to suppress the opponents. China and CCP changed it. So they will use the same tactics to suppress others. So other countries, to support Uyghurs is ultimately support themselves. Stop this monster from marching towards other innocents in the world. So now, why the world? One of the reasons why the world is so against Russia, because Russian invasion, expansionism inside and beyond Ukraine will be existential threat to Europe and to the world. That's why the world is to some extent mobilized against Russia. Same logic is here. If the world is not unified against China, then you will be next. For China, there's no difference between Uyghurs and non-Uyghurs. It will kill anybody in its way towards the superpower, to replace the US, to be the superpower not only in the Indo-Pacific area but beyond. And we are the severe victims of this global hegemony of China. So that's why world needs to support Uyghurs. As that.
Thank you very much, sir, for such insightful comments. I would now like to invite Anisha to give the thank you note.
Thank you, Madhya. I hope I am audible.
Yes, you are audible.
Thank you. On behalf of RLA, I propose the official vote of thanks to the distinguished guests, of course, our lovely moderator Madhya, and the patient audience that we had. The topic of today's discussion was a very pressing issue, which has to be talked about as much as is possible. RLA has had a legacy of talking about all the atrocities that CCP conducts against all its minorities, and we have been very vocal, be it in case of the Uyghurs or the Tibetan Buddhist, everyone who has been a victim of their atrocities is a friend to us, and we have always voiced your concerns on any platform that was provided to us. So we will continue that spirit, and with that we will conclude today's discussion with the promise of rejoining, again collaborating on another day, and continuing this very important topic discussion. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you, everybody, for having us.
Thank you. We may now, one by one, leave the meeting as well. Thank you so much. Have a nice day.